you put out a mock draft here last week, and that's kind of like the next thing for Valkyries fans is we've had our expansion draft, we've had the free agency, we got Tiffany Hayes. Sure, we were expecting maybe a bigger splash, but hey, we'll take the 6th player of the year. But the next thing on the agenda here is the draft, and we have the 5th pick in the draft and in your mock draft. And I was able to find 2 online on this is a different gripe I have to pick with the Athletic, but I typed in WNBA mock draft on the Athletic search and I had it under the article tab, and none of your pieces even came up. It was so I just went to the author tab, Sabreena, and then I would go down from there. But I've had that issue with the Athletics app for a little bit now. But you guys, you had us selecting Kiki Iriafen from USC with the 5th pick of the draft, and then I was also able to find one that I think happened right after the draft lottery,
right?
November 18th, and you had us taking Georgia Amoore. So I was wondering, to me, it kind of seems like the draft starts at 3. It seems like everyone basically has Paige 1, Olivia 2, I guess barring any trades, but that kind of seems like the top 2 right now. If somehow we were to get to number 3, we being the Valkyries, if the Valkyries were able to get to number 3, who do you think they'd select?
Yeah, I don't really have a great sense of what the Valkyries are trying to accomplish here in year 1 because, I wrote about this after the expansion draft that it seemed like they were drafting a team during the expansion draft that was like built to surround a star. Like it was all complementary players, right? Veteran role players who kind of, you know what you're going to get with them. Maybe not a ton of upside, like other than like the Kate Martins and like Ileana Repairs of the world, but it definitely seemed like they were trying to like create a team that could supplement like a Jewel Lloyd or a Kelsey Plum or, insert all-star who happens to sign with the Valkyries during free agency. And admittedly, that didn't happen. Like Tiffany Hayes is a former all-star, but I wouldn't say that she's at that point of her career in the moment, right? So I don't really know if like the Valkyries want to select somebody who maybe is going to stay in Europe for one more year and you don't even get to have them on your inaugural team, or do they want to select somebody who like this is our rookie, this is our first draft pick, and you're going to love them immediately, and they're going to be the person that we market around, and like this is going to be a good selling point for us in year 1 of the Valkyries franchise. So like if they want to just go long term, like we don't really care if this player is going to be here in 2025, they should select Dominique Malonga. I think she is the highest upside, the most potentially talented player, 6'6" center out of France. She was on the Olympic team last year. She's only 19 years old, maybe has turned 20 actually, but relatively young, especially compared to the college draft prospects that you're going to get. And she's just super athletic, really toolsy. Like the jump shot's still a work in progress, but she can defend a variety of positions. And I think just a league like the WNBA, where it's so important to have a really quality 4, a really quality front court player to build your team around, that seems like the kind of player you'd want going forward. It's just like, is she going to come to the W in 2025? There's Eurobasket this year. France presumably will be a part of it. She'll have to leave at least for 10 games. France usually likes to have their players for a long time before these international competitions. So like, would she even be able to come over before that? And then it's a whole thing of like, do you really want to start off your big splashy inaugural first year with a player who's just not there? And I don't envy that position because like, it's really hard to balance the long-term arc of your franchise with, hey, like we're building something new here and it'd be nice if people were here to see it and be part of it. So I think if we're just like, building this like on a spreadsheet and like not thinking about marketing or any of that, I believe Dominique Malonga is the best possible pick for this franchise, whether that's at 3, whether that's at 5, whatever. I do love the idea of Georgia Amoore though for the Valkyries, and she kind of not necessarily the same high upside play, right? Like she is a smaller guard, she's only 5'6", but she is a point guard with a predilection for long distance shooting. Like a really good organizer of an offense, has been running a pro offense, I would say, under Kenny Brooks for like the last 4 years of her college career. And frankly, it's too easy for me to like make the Steph Curry comparisons, right? Like a guard who can just like pull up from long range and like can excite the fan base in a way that I think is kind of necessary, for year 1 of a franchise. So I like her a lot, whether that's 3, whether that's 5, for the Valkyries, because I think it just kind of helps when you have a good point guard to build things around. Maybe that's less of a necessity now that Tiffany Hayes is signed with the Valkyries, but Those are the two players who I kind of had my eye on originally. Kiki Iriafen, I think if they end up, staying at 5 and not being able to move up to 3 makes a lot of sense because of her Northern California ties too. And again, just going back to the whole like this is a league of power forwards, but I would say like those 3 players, probably the Malonga and Amoores of the world, if you're going to move up to 3, make the most sense to me.
By the way, and this is not to embarrass Brian in any way, but because of some of the free agent pickups, the Valkyries have Brian doing like YouTube streams of like French national games right now.
Oh yeah,
like, that's how dialed he is into this stuff. But I'll let Brian get to that because I just wanted to mention one more thing about Kiki because we were talking to writer Michelle Smith about this, who has Bay Area ties. She actually works in Silicon Valley at San Jose State. And we were kind of talking about like the Bay Area being the giant area that it is, really good media market. How does Joe Lacob want to present the face of the franchise? We know with the free agency stuff, like who knows who's going to be here and who's going to move on. And there's going to be so much movement, especially next year to line up big deals. And so if you can get a Kiki Iriafen, who did play majority of her career in Stanford, coming out party last year in the tournament, like I feel like he would probably try to move mountains to get her if she is available anywhere near them, just for the mere fact that he can just put her in every marketing thing that they have, and it's an easy sell to this area because we got to see her.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a nice marketing plug too. I don't actually think they would need to move up to 3 to pick Kiki Iriafen, frankly. That's nothing against her. I just think the way the draft's going to work with like Chicago and Washington both already having a lot of young bigs and not necessarily needing to take another one. So that might be able to work in their favor, right? Like you don't have to make a big push. She could just land in your lap and it'd be a nice, wholesome outcome for everybody.
Yeah, I have going back to what you said, I have questions about Georgia, about Dominique and Kiki. So I think I'll start with the Georgia one because you thought that, maybe if we were at 3, we would still select her. I kind of had more of a question along the lines of like basketball, like the WNBA philosophically, because of course, this is a Warriors podcast. There's an NBA background, and I don't know if this is a fair comparison, but I looked up the average height of an NBA player, and it's 6'6", and then I looked up the average height of a WNBA player, and it's 6 foot. So normally I'm just like, okay, for my head, like a 5'6" WNBA player could equate to a 6 foot NBA player, and in the NBA, those players have kind of phased out. It's more so like 6'2", 6'3" is the shortest guard now. It is really like just blessed with natural talent and like the will, then you have a chance.
Chris Paul side-eyed you right now, by the way.
He's the last one.
Trae Young, like, too, honestly. Yeah.
Him, Trae Young, and I think like both Jones brothers, like Tyus and Trae Jones, are like what. And then I think there's a Japanese player on the Memphis Grizzlies. But anyway, do you think like the 5'6" point guard for the WNBA is here to stay? And I know that one of the best ones is still coming up in Hannah Hidalgo, and I think she'll be a hit no matter what in the WNBA. But I guess past her, talking about Georgia, talking about, I think Rory Harmon's 5'6" as well.
Yeah. Do
you think that type of archetype is like here to stay as the league progresses in the next 5 years?
No, I don't think so. I think this is an anomalous situation, and the height is, truthfully a huge concern to me because I think about players like Crystal Dangerfield, who was Rookie of the Year in 2020 as a 5'6" point guard and hasn't really been able to carve out a career since then, just because there's a lot of defensive limitations when you're that size. And I think I'm just looking at this draft, and other than the international players who, again, there's an inherent amount of risk just with their availability and how their games are going to translate if they come to the W. I'm not sure that there's like anyone with the star power of Georgia Amoore beyond her. And so I'm willing to just kind of take a risk on her upside, knowing that, yeah, she's a little small, but also this is a type of player who has been getting ready to be a pro player basically since she got to Virginia Tech like 5 years ago. The way she finishes around the rim, it's all like you can see like the ways that she angles herself. It's not because of what the defense is doing to her. It's because what she's expecting like an actual WNBA defender would be doing to her, right? Like the side steps that she takes on her threes to get space, like everything has been with the goal of like, when I see pro style defenders, how am I going to be able to account for that? Like, and I'm trying to do that starting now, even though like everybody in the ACC isn't capable of necessarily defending her that way. So I just believe that like she has a certain understanding of how to play point guard, and point guard is actually like low key a really not deep position in the WNBA. Like it's really hard to find a good point guard. So if you can get a player who could potentially be like an anchor for you at that position for a good amount of years to come, who again has like the jump shooting ability, has the flair. I think that's part of it, right? Like she's just kind of a fun player to watch. She gets her teammates involved and just brings a lot of excitement to the floor. Like, I mean, like this is an entertainment product, right? Like we want, things should be fun to watch. It should be bringing joy to the court, right? And I think Georgia just has that innate ability to like run a team and this magnetism while she's doing it. And I have a hard time like looking away from all that. And the fact that she's led really successful teams like for the past 4 years, right? And going from, the continuity of Virginia Tech to following Kenny Burst to Kentucky. And yeah, she's running the same offense, but she has almost an entirely new set of teammates to work with, and it still has flowed like tremendously. So I I I agree with you about the height thing, and honestly, I think it's an even bigger concern on the W side because like the range of outcomes in the W is a little bit smaller, right? Like 6 inches is like more standard deviations than it would be in the NBA. So I agree that that's definitely something to like be concerned about. It's just I look at the prospects below and I'm not overwhelmed by the potential star quality like that you'd be missing out on if you took Georgia Amoore at that spot. So that's also part of it for me.
Okay, so I guess then capitalizing on like the star quality,
Mhm.
because of so I guess the next player kind of seems like the consensus 4 or 5 prospect is Dominique Malonga, and because so many of the Valkyries are like on like the French national team for the Eurobasket qualifier games. Now Janelle Salon, who by the way I think looks awesome,
Yeah. Great
Ileana
pickup.
Rupert,
Yeah.
and Carla Late. Like I've been trying to watch some of those games, and because of that, I've gotten to watch some Dominique Malonga. And my goodness, like I was just very like blown away with, of course, the size. And I feel like she has a really good defensive instinct and defensive awareness. And then even the potential shooting ability
Mhm.
for like someone her size. Like I think of, and like I guess I've, this will kind of show of how recently I started watching women's college basketball, but kind of what comes to my mind is, that 6'7", like really dominant player in the paint being like a Camila Cardoso or a UCLA, Lauren Betts.
Lauren Betts, yeah.
And when I think of those players, like I think they're amazing players, but they can't shoot the three. And it's made me way more like thinking like Jonquel Jones, like one of the best players in the WNBA, because she can do that and also be that amazing presence inside the paint. And so just the fact that Dominique is like even trying that ability of hers to shoot from the three, I don't know how good it's been. I've seen her hit a couple in games, but I guess my question is, Lauren presumably might be the number 1 pick next year. Camilla was, number 4 last year. Like these are players who you have a 6'7" player with any type of basketball skills, great hands, like they're going to be really good and go high in the draft. My question is like, why isn't Dominique like maybe the kind of just consensus like number 2 with her size and kind of abilities that she's shown so far?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say it's just an international bias, frankly. We're more familiar with players in the collegiate game for a league like the WNBA that has historically like had to work a little bit harder to market its own players. To get that built-in advantage from college is something that's just hard to steer away from, right? Like it's institutional knowledge, right? Like we take the biggest college stars and we try to make them pro stars, and that's how, we keep the machine going. I realize that's not necessarily like the best way to think about things all the time because the worldwide basketball is expanding, and obviously France gave the USA a hell of a time in the gold medal game at the Paris Olympics. But I think a lot of it is just inherent bias, right? Like this is how we think of the draft. It's we look at the best college prospects and like we only think of international. Like there's nobody really in the college world that makes sense at this particular spot. Um, I think so. When we think about the draft, like dating back to the lottery, it was just a lot of teams in those slots all have the young bigs, right? Like the Sparks were in that spot to begin with, right? And with Chicago and Washington also in the lottery, like it was just why would any of these teams want to draft another young big when they have Ali Edwards and Cameron Brink and Camila Cardoso and all these other players, right? Um, Now that like Seattle has moved in, I think there's more of a conversation about, okay, what could they potentially use? Like they could theoretically draft a younger big for the future because their front court players are a little bit older, right? With Neko Gumake in her 30s already. I think a lot of it's just availability, right? Like there is a history of players on the French national team having to commit a lot of time during the summers to the national team, more so than other national teams. And because the French league plays longer than other leagues, it's harder to get them to the WNBA for the start of the season, which is complicated even further by the prioritization rules, which Gabby Williams has, dealt with for the last 3 seasons. So I think it's just a combination of factors, like for whatever reason, being French is like the biggest disqualifier to being a WNBA player, right? Like because of the national team, because of the league. I think that's just like some inherent bias against that. And I really do believe that's what it is, because when you look at the quality of her as a prospect, like there's no denying that she should be in that number 2 spot just logically, but because of the, extracurricular factors, I think that's what moves her further down the draft board.
Yeah, and looking at like the Valkyries roster right now, there's like, of course, you've said it on a podcast. There's a clear like international, I don't know if intentional focus, but there are a lot of international players that even competed in these European, the Eurobasket qualifier games, like Julie Van Loo. I think her last name is Linskens.
Yeah, Kiara Linskens, the Belgian big, right? Who's apparently Julie's best friend. So kudos.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, and again, I think that's a training camp contract that she might not even make the final 12. But even so, like I looked at the schedule and I looked up when Eurobasket is, and we have a home stretch when that's happening. And so presumably the most watched game for the Valkyries this season is going to be one of 2 games. It's going to be either their first game of the season or the Caitlin Clark game. And Caitlin Clark is coming to the Bay while Eurobasket is happening.
Oh, no.
So they're going to be missing, Rupert, Salon, Carla. I don't even know if Carla's going to come, but Julie. So that is going to be like, if they do select Dominique, like Joe Lacob's going to be like, wait, none of my roster is here while Caitlin Clark is here. And and I think there's a Liberty game in there as well. So that timing is pretty rough for them. And I guess this wasn't one of the questions I wanted to ask, but now that I'm thinking down this road, do you think anything's going to change in terms of scheduling to like, I mean, of course not this year, but just in general, the WNBA schedule, like allowing for more of, I don't know, just moving stuff around. Like I've heard about this prioritization rule, and I've heard that international players aren't as, like, they feel like it's like an American rule, and they're not as pleased with how it's going right now with that.
Yeah, so I think we can just start with the prioritization rule, which came into effect during the 2020 CBA, and essentially says that if you are playing overseas during the offseason, you have to be back by the start of training camp, or else you are not eligible to sign with the WNBA team that year. And as you mentioned, it's kind of like disqualifying for foreign players who play in leagues that last a little bit longer, maybe want like a slight break before coming over, and if they happen to play for a really good team whose calendar lasts longer than that, runs into conflict with the start of the WNBA season. And to the EuroLeague's credit, like they've tried to shorten their seasons, or at least move them up so that they don't conflict with the start of WNBA training camp. It's really only the French league that has a conflict now. And it still seems like it's something that's, it's designed to prioritize the WNBA and prioritize the American League. And obviously that is with the intent of bringing American players over, but it's sort of had like this chilling effect on foreign players wanting to come, because it seems like there's even lessons. The WNBA is becoming like sort of less welcoming to them, right? But as far as the Eurobasket situation, like I don't see a way around it. Like at least the WNBA allows its pro players to go and play in these tournaments, right? Like the NBA does not do that. The NBA doesn't even allow its American players to play in Olympic like qualifiers and American Cup things during the course of the regular season, right? They have like a G League squad essentially that does that and plays those qualifying tournaments. So I think there is an understanding between the WNBA and international basketball that these international tournaments are important. We're not going to get in the way of them, right? Like they take the whole month off for the Olympics. They end the season early for the World Cup, in those every 4 years. They can't also make a break for Eurobasket after making a break for the Olympics, right? It would be unreasonable, especially since the majority of players are not involved in Eurobasket, right? I think Golden State is obviously can be very affected by Eurobasket, but the majority of teams will have maybe 1 or 2 players who are in that situation.
Got it.
Yeah. So unfortunately for the Valkyries, it's going to suck. And I do believe that the international focus was intentional. Like their assistant general manager was just the president of the London Lions, has a long international track record. But yeah, it's going to suck for the Valkyries. Like, there's just no getting around it. And it's just too bad that it happens to be in their first season.
Yeah. Okay. So, or do you have a question?
Well, I was just going to follow up and say, you mentioned the 2020 CBA. I mean, I thinking of the NBA and the globalization of the NBA, and we can even look at Major League Baseball. Like, the biggest superstar in Major League Baseball is Japanese born. And so the Dodgers, I don't know what the Japanese market looks like as far as American baseball is concerned, but whatever that looks like they have it. The Dodgers have it.
Especially after this offseason too.
Right. With Sasaki, and we're Giants fans, so our hearts are very broken by that. So like as as we get to the future, how much are they looking at fixing those situations to embrace the globalization, knowing that how the NBA embraced it, and now, out of the top 10 players, like probably half of them or more are not US born, and that enhances the game if you are actually looking for the best players.
Yeah, I think in the 2020 CBA, it was sort of a concession from the players that they have to give to the owners in order to get more money and more benefits. Was, okay, we'll make this league a bigger priority, because so many of them were literally coming back to the WNBA 2 weeks after the season had already started, like not getting to any of training camp. And it really just diminishes the product at the start of the year, right? And you think about when the buzz is biggest for the WNBA, it's, oh, like, we're getting all these commercials during the NBA playoffs. The NCAA tournament has just ended. Here's the draft. Tune in for our big opening night doubleheader. And it's like, well, Kayla McBride's still in Turkey and Nafisa Collier is still away. And what are we actually advertising, right? If not the very best that we can. So I understood the logic in, wanting to have everybody in market on their teams for the start of the season. I do think that the penalty is probably going to be a little bit less severe in the new collective bargaining agreement, where, there's still probably will be a fine if you report late, or, maybe I think a fine is probably as heavy as it'd have to go, but not like restricting a player from playing altogether that season. Like, that seems a little bit too onerous in my opinion. But I do understand just wanting to have as much of your well, not 144 anymore, but as much of your 156 in market as possible, when the season starts. That makes sense to me. And yeah, the thing is, with the international calendars, the international players, it's always been a sacrifice for them to come over, right? Because the only way that you're going to make the WNBA more attractive to them than playing at home is just to give them so much more money. And the league is just not there yet, right? I think that's what works for the NBA from a globalization perspective, is it behooves, Nikola Jokic to play in Denver versus Megalux, because he's making $50 million with Denver versus whatever contract he was making, in Europe. And that's just not the case for Emma Miesemann or, insert European all-star here. So I think it's not so much the prioritization rule. It's just the only way that they can make this a globally attractive league is for them to throw out the money that the Russian leagues did, or the Chinese leagues do, or,
how far apart are we talking about?
I mean, they're making 7 figures easily, the best players in Europe, and the maximum contract in WNBA right now is $250,000. So for you to, one, play year round, because you're not getting a break if you play in Europe and then in the WNBA, and then 2, spend your summer away from home, that kind of sucks, right? So it's got to be a huge financial incentive, I think, and maybe that manifests itself in a designated player rule, sort of like what MLS has, right? Where you can break the salary cap a little bit to just bring in somebody, usually one of those older players from a European league. But I do think that I wouldn't necessarily blame prioritization for not getting as many European players. I think it's just a financial cost. Yeah.
I guess now kind of talking about, because I think there's the CBA that's re-upping, as well as the media TV deal, on the same year. And do you have any idea what maybe the max contract could shoot to from 250? Do you have a range of numbers? And because I think of the 2016 NBA offseason, and I'm so sorry to Evan Turner, because I always use his name when I bring this up, because he started making a ginormous amount of money when he shouldn't have been. But that's kind of the expected jump I'm anticipating, is just something crazy like that. But do you have a range of numbers from the last time this happened, maybe, to give any type of indication?
So the CBA that came into effect in 2020 essentially doubled the maximum salaries. So it went from a little over 100 to like 210, and it's grown steadily just with cap rises over the last 5 years. So I would expect a significantly bigger jump this time around because of the magnitude of the TV deal and all of the sponsorship money that has come into the WNBA since. I'm expecting seven-figure max salaries at this point. Like, I don't really see a reason why like the finances wouldn't support that at this point. Unfortunately for the Evan Turners of the world, we're not really going to get those because all of the good players are sorry, I phrased that really poorly. All of the all-star players are also free agents, so they're going to command the big contracts, and like, everybody I think will be like properly scaled.
True. Yeah, I forgot. Yeah,
Yeah.
everyone's going to be a free
Yeah.
agent after this, barring like a few players in the rookie contracts. Speaking of, do you think that I said this to Michelle Smith a couple weeks ago, but it is so frustrating that I cannot like find like eligibility that easily for college athletes. And I was saying like there is a website, but I have to be like Olivia Miles to like know my own eligibility. Like I can't just like type in her name and find it. I guess two-party question then. One, outside of Paige and Olivia, do you know if any of the other top first-round picks that are playing collegiate basketball that are expected to maybe declare for the draft still have remaining eligibility? And two, do you think they're going to forego that to maybe, because I think Olivia Miles is the perfect example for this because she is projected number 2 pick, but also next year, I imagine if she was to stay for one more year, next year you have Lauren Betts, Flage, Tanaya Latson, and Kiki Rice and Janiyah. Like I feel like Olivia could probably still be top 4, top 5 potentially if she was to take her last year of eligibility and then go back. And then, you're talking about, you said from a $250K max salary to now, 7 figures. And then from the rookie scale contract, I think it's top 4 picks, each all make like the same. And then there's the next one of like 4 to 10, I think picks make the same. Like what would stop? Like, wouldn't it be kind of smart for her to stay for one more year, presumably to make so much more money in her rookie scale contract for next year? I know there's no guarantees.
Right. Just from talking to agents, most of them seem to be advising their clients, like if they have another year of eligibility, to take it and stay in college for one more year because of the huge financial windfall that, could come for them in 2026 versus getting into the draft now. It's different for somebody like Paige Bueckers, who has an enormous like off-court portfolio and will probably be doing just fine financially. And like, I mean this with all due respect, it's a little embarrassing to play 6 years in college, so maybe she doesn't want to do that. But I could see Olivia Miles like heavily considering it, especially if it means like one more year of playing with Hannah Hidalgo at Notre Dame. And for her, it's kind of a natural 5th year, right? Like she had a full year of injury, so just playing out her medical redshirt year is something that's like very normal in college athletics, right? We have a few players in this draft who have already used the 5th year, like Georgia Amoore has. I think Maddie Westbeld from Notre Dame has already used her 5th year. Tahina Pow from South Carolina. A couple of the players who like could still play another year. AZ Fudd has another year of eligibility because of her medical red shirt.
Yep.
Thinking about, let's see now, Anissa Morrow would have to go pro.
Kiki has to go pro, right?
Kiki Iriafen has to go pro. That's true. Yeah. I'm just looking at like the big board I had at the start of the year.
Any of the NC State guards?
No. So Sanaya Rivers and Isaiah James would both have to go pro. I guess like Raven Johnson from South Carolina, she technically has a 5th year because she has an injury redshirt year too.
Got it. So it's kind of just like knowing those, like who has the injury redshirt. Because we're done with the COVID year, right?
Right. And then the WNBA draft eligibility works that if you're a junior who is turning 22 the year of the draft, you can declare early. So like we've seen this in the past with Jewel Lloyd and Jackie Young. Flage Johnson could declare early this year. Janiyah Barker could. Lauren Betts could. But again, all of them are in situations where probably makes sense to just stick out the 4th year in college and get back. Although then, like you mentioned, you're kind of getting into a really deep 2026 draft class. And ordinarily, I would think that would be a problem because it would make it less likely for you to stick on a team. But we're adding 2 teams to the league next year, so there'll be enough roster spots so that it shouldn't be a problem, I think. So if you're like, I mean, Lauren Betts is not going to have a problem regardless. But, other players of that.
I feel like because that would have been my next question, and I think you kind of answered it already. But someone like AZ Fudd, who I feel like also has like a pretty big off the court portfolio. Like what about for her, where she has another year, and I think she's going to take that year based on what I've seen. But say like Olivia and a few of the other players you mentioned take that year and go into the next draft, and now that draft class is like pretty loaded. And then from AZ's perspective, I assume she's still going to be like a first round pick, but maybe some teams are worried about the injury and she falls down a couple rounds. Well, not only like are you going to make more money in that next year, but also just from like round 1 to round 2 to round 3, just the prioritization of a team for that player, they're going to have, more leeway for a first round pick than they do a second round pick. Can you see someone like a AZ or a Janiyah saying like, you know what, I think we'd be a second round pick in the 2026 draft. Sure, we'll make more money, but in the 2025 draft, we'll be a first round pick. So maybe we should just declare early and have teams like, favor us more as opposed to if we waited another year. Is that even a scenario you could potentially see happening?
I mean, it's an interesting hypothetical. I would just say that WNBA teams are not super attached to their first round picks. Like you look at what happened with the 2023 draft, right? And a lot of players used an extra year of eligibility to stay till 2024. So we saw a super deep 2024 draft, right? And that meant that 2023 was a little bit weaker. So players who might not have been drafted in the first round ended up going in the first round. And what happened? Zai Cook got waived. Letitia Meher, number 8 pick, got waived. Grace Berger, number 7 pick, got waived. Stephanie Suarez, number 4 pick, got waived. Like because they expended a first round pick on them does not mean that they're more invested in their success. I think if you're a good player and you find a good spot, I think that's probably a better option than just trying to jumpstart your pro career.
I wanted to quickly, because I do want to ask you some non-draft questions, and you've been great with time, so we don't want to take up too much of your time. But I have a friend, Jonathan Messenger, who wanted me to tell you you're his favorite writer about the WNBA. But I asked him if he had any questions, and so it was sort of similar to what we were talking about Paige. Is there real apprehension that she may be dissatisfied by getting drafted by Dallas, even outside of eligibility stuff, but just the Dallas franchise?
I think there is, the Wings haven't had the most stable history, right? They've gone through head coaches basically every 2 seasons since they moved to Dallas. Recently, a change in the front office structure with Kurt Miller taking over for Greg Bibb. They have a history of players asking out after a couple seasons, right? Like Alicia Gray demanded a trade. Alicia Gray, who seems truthfully like the nicest, most easygoing star in the WNBA. And even she was like, no, I got to get out of here. Marina Mabrey, Sathu Sabali, like a lot of people spend time there and then quickly decide like, no, this is not the place for me. So I think, that's part of it. I've also spoken to some people who have suggested that like the political climate in Texas is not super attractive to Paige, just like with the scaling back of women's rights, not really a place that she wants to be. So, I obviously not every WNBA market is going to satisfy those conditions for her,
Sure.
but, California, Washington, Nevada seem like, more attractive just off the top of my head than I would say Texas. But yeah, I think there are a number of concerns just with the history of the franchise, the fact that it's still in a market that like, they don't have, they have just announced the practice facility and moving to a downtown arena, but like historically it hasn't provided the same player experience that some other franchises have across the WNBA. There's just a lot of things that go into it. And the fact that, the history of the Wings has been players wanting out rather than wanting in just doesn't do the Wings a lot of favors.
So I wanted to ask, so now we've asked about, just going back to the draft now, we've asked about, Georgia, Dominique, and now Kiki is who I want to ask about. That's around about the 3 to 5 range that have been in your mocks. She's kind of like, my like college women's basketball history kind of goes to a Arizona versus Stanford game because I went to Arizona and I was watching Ari McDonald versus Ailey Joe, and then of course my heart was broken. But Kiki, when I started to try and get into college women's basketball last year, I watched the Iowa State game and I was like, holy moly, in the tournament where she had like 40 something against them. Cam Brink fouled out, and I kind of picked her as my favorite player because I knew the Valkyries were coming in next year. I knew that she was probably going to go top 2. I thought for a chance that maybe we would be like a lottery pick. But anyway, I will watch those highlights like once every 2 months just to be like, this was awesome. And I actually watched them today before this podcast. And I was like, okay, not to like take any stock away from those highlights, but I watched them with a different perspective. Now knowing more about the teams and the players and Iowa State, and her game plan was kind of like, She gets the ball like about at the free throw line, and she faces up and she assesses, is Audie Crooks too far away from me? Okay, jumper. Is Audie Crooks going to push up against me? Okay, I'm taking her to the rim because I'm quicker than her. Is there someone else on me other than Audie Crooks? It's going to be way smaller. I'm taking them to the rim. And so she was able to go crazy. But now, you know, we watch her at USC, and I don't think it's like of course, completely different offense with, you know, Juju handling the ball a lot. And we're not seeing like the same, like get the ball at the free throw line, size up and make a decision and have more of a spread floor. And I just like wonder, like I watched, you know, during that tournament, I think I heard Ruoko maybe even compare her to like potentially like Asia. And then this year in the Paris game against Ole Miss, I think it was, she took a fadeaway, and I think Ruoko or someone said, that looks like Nafisa Collier. And so she has, since watching her, I've seen her get compared to who I believe are the two best players in the WNBA. And this is a league that's dominated by power forwards, them two, Alyssa Thomas, Brianna Stewart. And so I just think that like she could, you know, maybe be of that S, because like you watched those players coming up in college. And I was wondering, since I did not, did they kind of have these road bumps that, you know, Kiki's, I think, still having a great year on paper, but I just feel like I'm not seeing that potential star power that I saw in that one game. Of course, there's only one game, but I thought what I saw was just incredible. Did those players kind of have like were they just like greatness right from the start?
Yeah, unfortunately, my women's college knowledge is not as deep, you know, as my W experience has been. So I'm not terribly familiar with like Nafisa Collier as she was in college, or even Asia Wilson for that matter. I mean, I was kind of the fan that like just popped in for the Final Four games, you know. So
That's how I am.
just to get a sense of who we were going to watch, you know, in the WNBA in a month's time. But I will say that, you know, having really zoned in on Kiki, the offensive context at USC just has not been as like productive for her as it was at Stanford, where she was playing next to Big and Cameron Brink, who could space the floor, and Rhea Marshall just cannot do that. And you've noticed a lot of USC's just immediate adjustment has been, okay, we're going to play Kiki at the 5, spread the floor, give her the space to, you know, like you mentioned, size up the defense at the free throw line, whether that's a little face-up game, whether that's, you know, driving, posting, whatever. I think the decisiveness that you mentioned from that Iowa State game is something that has consistently stood out to me with Kiki, is that she doesn't waste a lot of time with her motion. Like she knows what she's going to do. It's just that the floor isn't always spaced for her to do what she wants to do at USC this season. So that's, I think, not necessarily like her fault. It's just a matter of who you're going to play her next to. And I think the bigs that are on the Golden State roster right now, like a lot of them have spacing capabilities. So maybe that makes more sense for a player like Kiki Iriafen. I just don't think that she has like the same number one scorer like upside that I thought, you know, coming out of that Iowa State game. It was, I think about that Stanford team a lot, and there was just nobody who could score on that group other than Cameron, Kiki, and then we get Hannah Jump going every once in a while. So it was a lot of responsibility shouldered on her, and I think that made it look like she was capable of putting up bigger numbers when she seems to be more of like a complementary offensive player, which is not a bad thing. Like she's a very good complementary offensive player, just not, I think, the same go-to scorer as all of those great power forwards that you mentioned. But what I will say is she is incredibly athletic, just an incredibly good offensive rebounder. The number of points that she gets for USC on her putbacks is just astounding, and how well she boxes out and clears out her space in the lane. Really, really impressive. And defensively, I think she's done a good job of, you know, having to defend more out on the perimeter and still, you know, being that rim protector. I thought most of the defensive impact on Stanford was a result of Cameron Brink last year, but, you know, Kiki has shown that she was a big part of it, and has been very productive for a dominant USC defense. So I think a lot of the physical tools are still there. You know, I wouldn't necessarily like be asking for her to go to the fadeaway like Nafisa Collier that often, or, you know, she's still very reluctant, I think, to take 3-pointers, but that's become, you can see like the form, it's something that she's working on. And as she gets more time, like, because you realize like this is basically her second season like playing full time, right? You know, she was a bench warmer her first season at Stanford, and like was a starter, but like kind of only a starter in name only at Stanford during her second season, because Tara really went with Haley Jones as power forward more often than not. So I have a lot of faith in her potential for development. I just think I wouldn't necessarily like bank on her ever being a number one offensive option. And that's kind of what like those other players, like they're their skill sets are
Yeah.
that Kiki's not yet.